Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. Coming to you live after the Rams have clinched a berth to the Super Bowl. So we can certainly chat about that. But tonight we're going to be chatting about the Broncos and Raiders coaching hires, as well as reviewing the interior defensive line, edge rusher, and linebacker rooms as we have been doing the last few weeks. Kind of revisiting the season as a whole, which I think is always good to do, as opposed to just kind of hashing out what happened in the last week of the season. So happy to do that. My name is Stephen Hackett. I'm your host for those who are news. And joining me today from the COVID list is Alex Insdorf. Alex, how you doing, man?
Still on there, but hopefully I'll be getting off in a few days. So excuse my voice.
Yeah. So, we're wishing Alex well. Hopefully he's able to recover soon. It sounds like he's about there. So maybe a couple of days or more. So also joining me is Tyler. Tyler with the fresh beard and the fancy schmancy don't shoot the messenger nickname, which we'll get into today. But Tyler, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Alex, whatever it takes to get out of exams, right?
There's no exams. It's like February.
Yeah, barely missing the start of the semester. So, yeah, I mean, obviously a crazy day of football. Again, we had some good games, which is great. Back-to-back weekends of competitive football. I thought for a second that the Bengals were about to get blown out, and then Patrick Mahomes put an all-time shit show performance in the second half. So instead of Chiefs and Rams, we get Bengals and Rams. Really quickly, Tyler, what'd you make of today's football, and who you got next week initially?
Oh gosh, I mean, so this week, I'm not saying I'm glad that the Niners didn't make it, but to me, you kind of have to sort of deserve it a little bit more. And when you don't really throw an touchdown the week prior, and you're throwing like one touchdown a week in the postseason, your quarterback, you're just not ready to go. And so for the Rams to make it, good for them. They went all in, so they deserve to make it. The Bengals are an interesting one because I certainly didn't expect them to be here. I don't even though they make the Super Bowl, I am not picking them to repeat next year because there's no way that all three of the division rivals in their group are going to all have the devastating COVID and injury issues and Big Ben Roethlisberger playing football out there. That's not going to happen. And they're not going to have the easiest schedule in the NFL. They're not going to play, the Raiders, the Titans, and then have, the Chiefs, who it was a very competitive game, or at least the Chiefs were competitive until they weren't. But honestly, good for them. Like, I think Bengals and Rams is a fun one. But I do think that the Rams, now I keep saying this about the teams that are playing the Bengals and they keep winning, much like the Raiders. Like, why do they keep winning? I don't know, but they just kept winning. But I do think the Rams are just like, they're just more talented. I think they sort of match up with them kind of well everywhere across the board. I don't really know that there's been a corner that's been able to really challenge like a Jamar Chase as much as someone like a Jalen Ramsey in this postseason. So I think that's going to be huge. And then obviously, that interior, Joe Burrow's been sacked 12 times this postseason, and Aaron Donald and Von Miller and Leonard Floyd are on the way. And that's got to be the worst case scenario there. And it's not like, they can mitigate it with like a really good run game or like Joe Burrow is going to get killed out there. The question is whether he can survive, and then whether his defense can bail out this team once again, as they have all postseason.
Yeah. Initially, I thought the Bengals were obviously dead in the water. Did not think that they were going to mount a 21-3 comeback, but you just sort of start to see them win these possessions. Their defense comes up huge for them again. Did not see that coming at all. And I think the Rams probably have to be the Super Bowl favorite. I mean, it's in their building. They got a little bit outclassed today, and they're building 80-20 in favor of the Niners, but ended up winning the game. It should be a good one next week. I think that the Rams probably take that one, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think from an entertainment standpoint, like we could have had better, right? Like somebody pointed it out earlier, Bills Packers would have been super fun to watch. But this is a matchup that I think is good for the league. Obviously, I think the league wants a team in LA to be in Super Bowls, and obviously we all wish that were the Chargers this year. But the Rams hosting the Super Bowl back-to-back years where a team gets to host the Super Bowl is kind of crazy. That's going to provide a lot of storylines for them. And then, I've been kind of shitting on Joe Burrow and kind of making fun of all the narratives and stuff like that. But I think the Bengals being in the Super Bowl is good for the league. I think we've kind of gotten away from it in terms of parody being like the coolest thing about the NFL because Tom Brady existed, I should say. But now you have this young team in the NFL that hasn't made a Super Bowl in 30 years. This is the first playoff win in 30 years and all that stuff. And I think this is good for the league. And I think, over the next few years, we're really going to see the AFC in particular get back to, being parity being the king of the NFL. As Tyler mentioned, if the Bengals were a wild card or missed the playoffs next year, like I wouldn't be all that surprised because Lamar Jackson was injured all year. Baker Mayfield was injured all year. But also, if they were back here again next year, I also wouldn't be surprised. So I think the Bengals being in is good, as much as me and other Chargers fans have been annoyed at the Joe Burrow versus Justin Herbert thing. I do really think that this is good for the league, and I do think that it's going to be a fun matchup.
Yeah, and it certainly challenges the way you can think about sports, where it's like, okay, you should only take an offensive tackle, in the first round over a wide receiver. Well, they only threw 3 passing touchdowns. The Bengals did this postseason. If you take out that screen pass, but there's an argument. You could obviously Jamar Chase got them to the postseason and obviously made plays. Can you tank and make it to the Super Bowl? Yes. The Bengals did that. Can you go all in, make the Super Bowl? Yeah. Can you turn it around in one offseason? Yeah. So I think there's so many discussions because of each of these teams. So it's really, really cool to see so many different narratives play out that, that aren't really the traditional sort of narrative. It's like build through the draft and retain your own guys. It's not always so simple like that. There's so many things you can do to get to this point, and both teams have shown that.
Yeah, I'm really surprised with the whole Joe Burrow thing and how that's gone down on Twitter, and how there were actually Chargers fans who were rooting for the Chiefs today because of Joe Burrow. Like, y'all gotta calm down.
I was never there.
Y'all gotta calm down with that nonsense. All right, he got to the Super Bowl. Justin Herbert's good too. He'll get there one day. Y'all gotta stop letting Dan Orlovsky get in your head.
Yeah, I was never to that point where I was like actively rooting for the Chiefs, but like I said, I think this is good. I do think the Rams should be considered the favorites. The defensive line is going to absolutely destroy the Cincinnati offensive line, which I think is really going to be the key to that game. Because, I was on the Sewell side of that debate, right? Like, of course, I'm the offensive line guy, and traditionally speaking, you can get receiver play later in the draft versus offensive line play being more difficult in the draft, and I think that's a fine take. But the problem for the Bengals has been their interior offensive line. And now they have to try and block Aaron Donald for 4 quarters. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I think Ramsey versus Chase is really interesting, especially because they've used Ramsey so much in the slot this year as opposed to playing on the outside. So that definitely is going to be interesting. And then, of course, we got the Utah connection, Matt Gay, Terrell Burgess, and Eric Weddle in that game. So, of course, I'm going to be having fun with that one. Much to Alex's chagrin. So, Alex, I promise this is the only time I'll be talking about Utah tonight.
I'm vindicated on Jamar Chase, by the way. I was right.
Yeah, that's a fun debate, and I think we'll see some of that pan out. So, that being said, we are going to talk about, like I said, what is happening in the AFC West. Of course, nothing has been made official yet on the Raiders side of things, but it seems they are essentially going to hire Josh McDaniels along with, I forget his first name, Ziegler, as the GM. They're going to try to do the whole Patriots West thing, which always works out well. There's been tons of examples of teams being able to replicate the Patriots and be able to figure it out and win Super Bowls. But again, not official. At least the GM hiring is official, coaching hire not. And then the Broncos have hired Nathaniel Hackett, former Packers offensive coordinator, which I think obviously a lot of people are going to connect the dots there with him and Aaron Rodgers. But I do think that Hackett was legitimately a good coaching candidate. He had other interviews too. So interesting hirings for both of these teams, right? Trying to replicate different things and trying to, bring different schemes in and stuff like that. Obviously, we'll see how that pans out. But Alex, what's your, I'm excited to hear this one, but what's your initial takeaways from what the Broncos and Raiders have done or, about to do at least?
I'll start with Nate Hackett. I thought, that seems like an okay hiring. A lot of people want to connect the dots to Aaron Rodgers, like Steven said, but it seems like he's kind of going to stay in Green Bay, based on what the last couple days have resulted for them anyway, and he's had some good meetings. So, and also you don't hire a coach just to go get Aaron Rodgers, right? Like you want someone who's going to be a really good coach. I'm a little bit neutral on him. I think that he could end up being good, but also it's a little bit of a weird thing to like hire a guy that's not that, or that wasn't the offensive play caller, I should say. I mean, it was Matt LaFleur who was calling the plays there. So, if people want to use that against Bieniemy, and, for a long time that was a calling card against him prior to Andy Reid speaking out for him, well, we're hiring this guy from the Packers who doesn't call the plays. I mean, I think that's a little bit weird, but we'll see how that goes. The Raiders, on the other hand, Ziegler, I mean, okay, you're trying to like recreate Patriots West, and you want to have that kind of Patriots way of going through the draft and developing talent. That's what it is. Why does Josh McDaniels keep getting jobs? Like he keeps not being good at what he does, and yet he keeps landing jobs. Like the Patriots were bad on offense in 2019 and 2020.
And this year, frankly, they weren't exactly great either.
Yeah, I mean, they were top 10 offensive DVOA, but like really were not an explosive unit. He was caught in a cheating scandal and then proceeded to go 2-8 after the cheating scandal when people figured out he couldn't coach anymore, then quit on the Indianapolis Colts, and then of course has had his career resurrected by standing next to Belichick. I'm sure we'll enter an NFL offseason where Steve Belichick is a candidate at one point because he stands next to him. But I don't know. I think Josh McDaniels is just a total fraud. I don't understand how he keeps getting chances in the NFL. He should have been done after the cheating scandal, yet he's here. So I just think it's such a shame that they would go that way. But I guess hiring Josh McDaniels is a little bit better than giving $100 million to a washed up racist.
That's true. I personally would not give $100 million to washed up racists. If I had $100 million, it's not the first thing that I would do. As for the Broncos, I'm at least glad they went with an offensive coach. There's some circles like, oh, Dan Quinn or whatever. Let's go defense again. And it's like, oh man, you guys are gonna go defense again. I don't really think your defense could have been a whole lot better this year.
Yeah,
and you guys didn't make the postseason. So them going offense is good. I was worried that they were going to get the either assistant or their actual offensive line coach over in Green Bay, because to me, the two things that the Broncos really needed to get over the top were a quarterback and an offensive line. And so for them to go get someone, they got Hackett, so to hopefully fix their quarterback situation. If they got the Packers offensive line coach as well, I mean, that would have been really kind of scary. Like, I don't want the Packers offensive line to suddenly make its way and be that good in Denver with a quarterback and that defense. That could be scary. So, whatever they figure out there, I don't know. Good for Denver, I guess. We'll see how it works out. As for the Raiders, listen, my dad can sell himself on anything Raiders related, like even like John Gruden and all that. But he was out on this one. Even he was like, oh man, I really don't want this to happen. And it did. To me, I think this is personally, I think this is going to be a you are here as long as Derek Carr is here sort of thing. I think there's better candidates potentially, but they want someone who can just walk in, is kind of established, is not a new, like no Brandon Staley types, a guy who's, been around and has all that sort of history, but he can kind of step in and probably get Derek Carr on the offense going faster than some of the guys who don't have that experience. That's the only way I can really look at it. To me, it's like it's not really a great hire, but go for it. If that works for you and your offense, you can sort of justify having Derek Carr and make that work for a little bit longer, go for it. I do feel bad for Bisaccia for not having that shot, but I also kind of get it. You kind of want to have someone who's either, younger or better on one side of the ball. Special teams coaches aren't that's not exactly, the way to go with the way this organization was headed. So, I'm not really too worried about either set of head coaches. I'm trying to say nice things in the off chance it comes back to bite me. But I'm not really. They're fine. They're fine. But McDaniels is definitely the worrisome one.
Derek Carr, I mean, speaking of him, it's good that he's heading into the last year of his contract, and they hired the guy who drafted Tim Tebow and traded up for him to replace him. So, I mean, that you could, that's a great talent evaluator.
Yeah, I think the whole thing with McDaniels is just a little weird because, I mean, typically we see NFL teams go in like the opposite direction when they hire new head coaches, right? Like that's what we're seeing with the Broncos. Like you could not be more different than Vic Fangio and Nathaniel Hackett. But I feel like McDaniels and Gruden, like at least are similar personalities. Maybe obviously I hope McDaniels doesn't have the racist emails and things like that, but from like a schematic standpoint, like they're gonna do similar things on offense. Like they're gonna keep things relatively similar on offense with Derek Carr, the 2 tight ends. That was like the thing that came out today, is that McDaniels would want to really involve Darren Waller and Foster Moreau. And obviously, I think that makes sense. And I think you have some parallel play between Derek Carr and Josh McDaniels. So, I think that's a little weird. It's going to be interesting to see who he hires on defense, because initially it was like, oh, he's going to hire Wink Martindale, who could not be more different than Gus Bradley, right? You go from lowest blitz rate in the league to highest blitz rate in the league, and highest zone rate to lowest zone rate. And then now it's like, well, he might hire this Sean Desai guy from Chicago, who's also a Fangio disciple. So it's like, that's also really different than like Gus Bradley. So they turned over their defensive roster a ton this past year, and they're going to have to do it again this year. And if they go into a 3-4 defense, like what do you do with Yannick Ngakoue and Max Crosby, who've been primarily 4-3 rushers? What do you do with the defensive line that they, again, revamped? To bring in Solomon Thomas, and you bring in Darius Philon and all these guys. So that's going to be interesting to see there. But I think the Hackett hire is good. Like, I think the problem in Denver these last few years has really been the quarterback position, and really like the lack of development. And that's kind of Hackett's calling card. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers doesn't need a ton of development, but kind of molding, and working with him to fit that offense. And then he actually really did great work with Blake Bortles in Jacksonville, and Jacksonville got worse after he left. So I don't know. Like, I think if you're a Broncos fan, you're probably feeling really good about this hiring, just because this is a guy who theoretically specializes in developing quarterbacks and, working the offense, which they have never really had outside of that 1 year with Kubiak. But I think the Haga hire is solid. I probably would have, gone in another direction, but the Raiders hire is just weird to me. Doesn't make any sense.
I wonder if the Broncos sort of knew that there's a strong possibility that they'd move on from Fangio, given everything this year, and then they would just take their quarterback when they had their next offensive head coach to then kind of decide which guy they wanted. Because obviously they went with Surtain, which was a great pick. It just obviously wasn't Fields or somebody else. So I'm curious if now they're going to go and get that quarterback, or if they're going to go one more bridge year.
Yeah, that's going to have to be something we'll keep an eye on. And like Alex said, Ian Rappaport did do a story today that the expectation is that the Packers are going to franchise tag Devontae Adams, and also that Devontae Adams wants $30 million per year in free agency if he does hit free agency. So you can officially cross him off the list if you were thinking the Chargers could go get him. And Aaron obviously has 1 year left on his contract. So if Aaron does decide to leave, demand a trade, then I think, the Broncos would have to give up a ton to go get him. But, I think that would make things more fun out here. And, we'll have to see we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, let's not have more fun. I want Rodgers.
Yeah, I was going to say, make things more fun for who, not us.
Hey, man, listen, I happen to think that the Broncos are not just an Aaron Rodgers away from winning a Super Bowl. I think obviously they'll be better, and obviously they'll contend for a playoff spot. Mm-hmm. But that defense had issues, and it really was Vic kind of pulling that thing together. And outside of Surtain and maybe Bradley Chubb, and Justin Simmons, of course, but they don't have like a ton of great players on defense anymore. And offensively, I happen to think their offensive line was bad this year. So I think them getting Aaron would be more fun to watch as a casual NFL fan. But as like a Chargers fan, I'm not like super worried about them being like a Super Bowl team if they get Aaron.
No, just stop talking. No,
I will say if Rodgers joins the Broncos, the Chargers are just going to always split in Denver or against Denver no matter what. Yeah. They just can't win in Denver. So if the if the Broncos could beat the Chiefs once and help the Chargers out, that would work out. Because when was the last time the Broncos beat the Chiefs? Hasn't it been never with Mahomes?
No, Mahomes has never lost to the Broncos.
Yeah, so if you could help change that and the Chargers still split with the Broncos, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, but my thing is this, Alex, like the Packers haven't been to the Super Bowl, and the Packers roster the last 2 years is better than the Broncos roster right now. Would you agree?
I mean, yeah, but that doesn't mean that I would rather have Aaron Rodgers starting for them
Oh,
than Drew
sure.
Lock.
Sure. Of course, if they can start Drew
I
Lock,
would
like,
rather
go for it.
I would rather them take Kenny Pickett than start Aaron Rodgers. Like that's
Of
what I'm
course.
saying. I don't want to take my chances and have Rodgers, Herbert, and Mahomes in the same division. Making it harder for the Chargers to win. And we if we're saying we would guarantee a split with Denver, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not guaranteeing a split against regular season Aaron Rodgers, right? Who always comes to play. So I don't know. I get where you're coming from, but I don't want to play Aaron Rodgers.
No, I mean, like, obviously, if they want to start Drew Lock or Pickett or whoever, like, go for it. I'm just saying that I don't think the Broncos are an Aaron Rodgers away from winning a Super Bowl. I think they could get Aaron and maybe contend for a playoff spot, but I don't know. I think that roster is a little overvalued. Is really my point here. All right, let's hop into some actual Chargers talk. Obviously, this is a Chargers podcast, so this is going to be a fun one, and we'll see what kind of tone this has. But we're going to talk about the defensive line and linebacker rooms as well as the edge rusher room, if we particularly have time. And we've seen a lot of negativity and participated in that negativity towards the run defense, and we can certainly talk about that. But I want to start with a positive takeaway, if we have one, about the defensive line in particular. So, Tyler, if you have a positive takeaway from the defensive line season, what would it be?
Okay, so this is contradicted by the stats and where Justin Jones ended up. But to me, like on the field, when Justin Jones was playing, I do think he was playing pretty well. The difference obviously being that he's not always on the field. And that's a huge, huge, huge issue and a reason they could let him go. But I thought, for all the hype we had been hearing about him, I think when he was on the field, I think he played well. I also think two positives, hang in there. I also think that Braden Fajoko, and we'll keep saying it, played well when he was on the field. A whole different story about why he wasn't on the field. But when he was on the field, he led the entire NFL in run stop rate. And it doesn't get better than that. So when he was on the field, he was doing his job better than against the run, better than any other defensive player in the NFL, according to that rate. So those two guys, I think, look really solid.
Positive, it can't get worse.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I see that. Yeah, for sure. I think Justin Jones is definitely a positive takeaway, and I wish that the production would reflect that, because you could see just the difference that having him on the field versus off the field made with this team. From a leadership standpoint, I think he really stepped up in a big way this season, and I think the team needs that. They need his juice, they need his energy. Like I said, I wish that it turned into more production, which could actually be a bit of a benefit for the Chargers in terms of re-signing him, because I don't think he would really cost that much on the open market, because he's been injured, because he didn't produce like a ton. So I think Justin Jones will be back, and I think his play is absolutely a positive takeaway. Tyler mentioned Braden Fajoko. I think that was fun too. That's tough for me though, because like I was really like trending towards wanting Linval Joseph back, through the first 10 games. Like he was completely balling out and looked like a totally re-energized player. So that's teetering on the negative takeaway for me. But I think if you look at the first 10 games of Linval when he was healthy, of course, pre-COVID, he was awesome. I'm worried there about the age in particular. Like, could he potentially, come back next year and play great and be healthy? Sure. But, just the likelihood of him doing that again at his age is not super high for me. So I wish Linval had played consistently and stayed healthy, but just the age and the injury and the COVID is concerning for me.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where, I mean, it sort of reminds me of where we were with like Brandon Mebane a little bit. Not that Linval was quite at that level of like washed, but is getting a little bit older. Did struggle a lot after the Eagles game, partially due to COVID, partially due to other injuries he was dealing with. I just feel like that's one of those where you move on. And if you were to bring Linval Joseph back, it's just sort of like, what do we mean by defensive line improvement at that point? Because then we're running back Linval Joseph, Jerry Tillery, potentially Justin Jones, and then we're kind of back at square one at that point, unless you go draft or make a big splash free agent signing. So yeah, no, I think you have to let him walk. I assume Christian Covington probably isn't back. I think Justin Jones is the big question mark, and I see it from both standpoints where you can kind of say, well, there was incremental improvement, and I do believe in rewarding, guys who produce on rookie contracts, right, and guys who are continuously getting better. And for someone who was a third-round pick and is playing a lot better than someone who was a first-round pick on that line, I think that's worth pointing out. So, I do think he deserves a second contract. Whether or not he's going to get one is going to depend on obviously what they do with Kaiser White, who we'll talk about a little bit later, and what they do with the rest of their free agent decisions as well. So I can kind of see the argument for both sides of re-signing Justin Jones, but to me, I would currently, as it stands, make the decision to re-sign him, and also go get your Akeem Hicks, your Sebastian Joseph Day, as people have been talking about, and try to kind of boost the defensive line in free agency, because it does need one outside of Justin Jones and outside of the guys that are currently free agents or on the roster.
Yeah, no, I expect them to put their money where their mouth is and really revamp this line and add some depth. The big question here, as Ryan points out, is Jerry Tillery is the former first-round pick. Obviously, I was much higher on him potentially breaking out than most. That was a big swing and a miss for me, and I will own that. And unfortunately, I was wrong. If you listen to Brandon Staley, you probably think he was right. But the Jerry Tillery thing is really tough because, and I understand, like, he should be a complimentary player at this point, but Brandon Staley loves this guy. Like, I don't know what it is. I wish I could see what was happening, but I mean, he's too good to play in the preseason, and he's improving like crazy, and he's a much better run defender. So, like, it's such a tough situation because if he were the fourth defensive tackle and he weren't a first-round pick, I'd be like, okay, like, sure, whatever. But he is a former first-round pick, and he is probably starting. And like, whoever they sign or draft, like, I'm sorry, like, Jerry Tillery is going to be starting alongside whoever the nose tackle is and Justin Jones if they bring him back. Like, they're not benching Jerry Tillery until they absolutely have to, which is just, it's really unfortunate, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke to the fire that Tillery is this favored child sort of thing. I know earlier in the year, Stephen, you had heard that he was the golden child. Then Joe Reedy comes out and and then Joe Reedy comes out and uses a similar phrase on Twitter, which I thought was really interesting. And then you and I, Stephen, both in separate conversations, heard about accountability being an issue, and I'm hearing that word getting brought up, accountability. Now, I think people can say, well, the general manager is making the coach do this. I guess that's possible, and there are all sorts of theories and conspiracy or not. But it does sound like accountability is the issue. And to me, that does kind of come down to coaching, especially on this interior defensive line where see that they've, like, it's not like they no, they didn't have a preseason for Tillery before, but like them letting Tillery sit out feels kind of like a coaching thing. The way they've manipulated the interior defensive line roster, cutting a Telesco pick to bring in Staley's guy, that kind of feels like a coaching thing to me. So it's been an interesting conversation. Some of it you can see, some of it just with conversations you can hear that accountability is a real issue. And it does sound like Tillery is going to start. So the other word that gets brought up that I thought was interesting was reconstruction. And that's that, if Tillery's the word that I was told, reconstruction. And if Tillery's the starter, obviously, to me, reconstruction means that Joseph and Jones are both gone, in my opinion. And I think that does make sense. One, because Joseph and Jones are unreliable at this point, whether it's health, age, or both. They made plays, but they can't be counted on for 17 games in a run. Steven, as you pointed out in your free agent video, it's a deep free agent group for defensive tackles. Whether they fit what they want, I don't know, but it's certainly a deep group. Staley's come out and said that they're going to make changes along the defensive line. Telesco has said that not every starter on this defense will return. It could just mean Chris Harris Jr., but I think it does go further than that. So I don't know. To me, like at this point, we know Tillery is starting. He is the favorite child, whether that's just the GM, just the coach, or both, whatever. But for whatever reason, he is going to start, and then listen, they're going to reconstruct this roster or this interior defensive group. And we know that based on what the coaches have said, based on what we heard, based on what we guess, Telesco is going to take that reactionary approach and, like, oh, I should fix the offensive line. I'll do that now. And then he does it. And it's like, oh, well, now I need to fix the defensive line. So I'll do that now. It's not, it's not preemptive. It's definitely reactionary, but it seems like he's going to be doing that. And, it was interesting. I had heard earlier this year, I think this is an exaggeration, that they would add 3 defensive tackles in the draft. That was really early this year. I do think that's an exaggeration once you factor in free agency. But I mean, they have 11 picks. They need a nose tackle. They need a defensive tackle. They need someone to replace Covington, some sort of backup or late rotation guy. So they may not add 3 defensive tackles in the draft, but I think adding 3 overall, in general, could make sense at this point. And then I literally just asked, and the current update is that there's no doubt that they sign and draft a defensive tackle. So there's reconstruction on the way for this group. I think Tillery is going to be the starter. I think he's the penciled in starter. There's no accountability. He is going to be the starter regardless. And I think the next 2 guys on the other side of him, or next to him, are not going to be back. So I think big changes are on the way for this group, except for the guy that most of us want to get rid of.
It's great stuff. It's awesome.
Look at Asian Rappaport over here, just dropping scoop after bomb after scoop. I mean, it's great. No, I don't know. The thing with Jerry Tillery is, he's going to start, like Tyler said, and I sort of think the problem is, like, can you have a good defensive line with him playing 70 or 80% of the snaps? And I ask this because Jerry Tillery is a bad run defender. Like, he's an okay pass rusher, right? Like, and I get why Staley likes him. People mentioned, the hit on Mac Jones and, the energy he brings, and he can get into the backfield and make some plays. I don't think there's any disputing that. But like, he's such a liability in that regard because he's getting easily pushed around in the trenches. And I don't know how you, I guess this is the challenge going forward, is how do you get that pass rush production while also not sacrificing the things that the Chargers really struggled with this year, right? Which is stopping the run. So, is Jerry Tillery's, let's say he, breaks a sack record and gets 5 sacks next year. Let's say he gets 5 sacks and ups his production and pass rushing stats. Is that worth, I guess, the, drawbacks of that, which are you're going to give up a lot of, rushing yards unless you really improve everything else around him. And even in that scenario, he could still get gashed in the run game. So, like, I don't know. I've come to terms with the fact that Jerry Tillery is going to be on this team for at least 1 year. Pray to God it's not more and they don't pick up the 5th-year option. But, like, I just don't see how you can have a defensive line. I think you can have a defensive line that is above average good, but, like, I don't think you can have a truly elite defensive line with Jerry Tillery on it, because I just think he's taking up space and he's going to lose in the trenches, like, very frequently. And we saw that a lot in games, unfortunately. So for all the upgrades in pass rushing production that you could get from him, I just think it's hard to, like, throw Sebastian Joseph Day in there, Keem Hicks, but I don't really get how you improve it when you're going to be asking Jerry Tillery to still play that amount of snaps in that volume.
Yeah, I think certainly it can improve, but it's going to be like starting Storm Norton at right tackle for 16 games, right? Like it's this basically the same thing. Maybe Tillery's probably a little bit higher tier than Storm is, and I would think so. But my biggest issue here is kind of what Craig is pointing out in the chat, is that if you use Tillery as a situational pass rusher, then I'm fine with that. But Jerry Tillery had logged more snaps this season than both Joey Bosa and Uchenna Nwosu along the defensive line. Of course, they play different positions, but Jerry Tillery is playing 80% of the snaps. That's kind of ridiculous. And that really counteracts the whole, like, aspect of defensive line. Like, you want to keep your guys fresh. You want to have a rotation. And of course, some of that is being able to rely upon, the players behind him, which we never really saw. But I think my biggest issue with like revamping this and going forward is, are we ever going to see them actually have like a true rotation, or is this always going to be Tillery or 1-3 technique playing 85% of the snaps, 80% of the snaps, which just, you don't see that along, great defensive lines. I mean, we just saw the 49ers have a great defensive line, and, they're rotating 8-9 guys in there. They're rotating DJ Jones and Arden Key and Eric Armstead and like all these guys. And the Chargers are just like, all right, well, here's 70 snaps of Jerry Tillery. So I think the defensive line can absolutely improve. Like, I think if you get a Sebastian Joseph Day, Akeem Hicks, we'll see who they draft and things like that. Like, it can improve. And I don't know how much of an improvement this team truly needs, like, to reach its ceiling where we want this team to go. But my biggest issue there is a rotation, because in an ideal world, like, let's say you sign Sebastian Joseph Day, re-sign Justin Jones, hopefully add somebody else via the draft or free agency as well, and you have Braden Fajoko, that gives you 5 capable bodies, but you need to rotate those guys. Like, you can't just keep having this same lack of rotation where your backup nose tackle is playing 7 snaps and your backup 3 technique is playing 20 snaps. Like, you need to have a healthy rotation there, which I hope is something that improves.
Yeah, well, that's why they tried to bring Banks on to make that rotation really good. That's pretty bad. Just don't even need. I mean, yes, the Rams have Aaron Donald, but they also have Greg Gaines. They had Sebastian Joseph Day, Ashawn Robinson, like these guys that just go out there and do their jobs. Are they the biggest names and the biggest stars? Are they Vita Vea? No. Are they Aaron Donald? No. But there's guys that just go out there, rotate, and do their jobs. And the Chargers are just going to let Jerry Tillery have at it for another year. I mean, I don't know how much worse he could. Like, I think at this point he's kind of where he is, and maybe he'll improve a tiny bit more because he's in a familiar system now and he has an official offseason. The same things we say all the time. Yeah. But like, it's just, they're going to rock with it. And this whole year really is about them rocking with their first round picks.
Yeah, and I guess that brings us, I don't know if we want to start touching on the linebacker room, but that brings us to Kenneth Murray and what the Chargers' grand vision is for him going forward. And it also brings us to, of course, Kyzir White, who the Chargers have to decide to sign or not re-sign after playing his lowest snap percentage in Week 18 against the Raiders. And I don't know what they're going to do. I know exclusive insider extraordinaire Tyler Schoen has an idea of what they're going to do. But to me, I think it's one of those things where you probably have to bring Kyzir White back because, like, if you're going to play Jerry Tillery, you have to be able to stop the run somewhere. And Kyzir White is their best run defender in the linebacker room. So, but there's also the first round pick thing, which we've talked about with Tom Telesco, and that's why Jerry Tillery is going to be starting next year. And it's probably why Kenneth Murray also is going to be starting next year. So that's really the challenge is like, okay, well, if you have Jerry Tillery and Kenneth Murray in these big starting roles, whereas, you could have, a pass rusher that you get in free agency plus Kyzir White back there, like, I think people would just be a lot more comfortable with that kind of an arrangement, and it would make a lot more football sense, if you will. So I don't know what they're going to do, but I do think it's one of those things where, and this is why we decided to do the episode this way, why the defensive line and linebacker rooms are related in this free agency. It's like, well, if you bring back Justin Jones, that's going to directly affect potentially bringing back Kyzir White. And if you don't bring back Justin Jones, then, or if you bring back neither, then that's going to adversely affect the run defense before you even start free agency, right? So I don't know what the Chargers are going to do, but there does seem to be this problem where, I know Staley doesn't value linebackers. We saw that with the Rams defense, but at the same time, it's like, okay, then why, if you don't value linebackers, then why is it so important to play Kenneth Murray this amount of snaps, right? Like that's something that I don't personally get either. I hope both of them, Kenneth Murray and Jerry Tillery, they will be on the team next year. I hope both of them ball out and prove us all wrong. But from what we've seen from them, the last 2 years in particular, I just don't see how you could build this defensive line and, improve this run defense in such a way around them as liabilities that it makes it okay for Kyzir White or Justin Jones to be able to walk.
Yeah, you and Craig are both making, very similar and great points about the Staley defense, right? Like it doesn't necessarily value the linebacker position. And we've seen that in Denver. We saw that with the Rams last year. The problem there is that you have a bad defensive line and not great depth at safety, which is kind of the alternative. Like, we just saw the Rams kind of carry this over. The only linebacker who saw significant snaps tonight for them was Troy Reeder, and everything else was all safety looks. So if the plan is to like add more safeties and get better on that back end, like, sure, I guess I can understand, but you still need to play a linebacker, and Kyzir White was far and away your best linebacker. So, that's the positive takeaway, right? Of course, Kyzir White balling out and playing the best ball of his career, like that's a positive takeaway. It just kind of sucks because if they do let him walk, then you're getting significantly worse. And of course, like Kenneth Murray is kind of the focus there, but Drew Tranquil is approaching that same kind of category for me because he's always had these injury concerns. He's not great against the run. Like he's very solid in coverage, and I totally get that. But replacing Kyzir White and whoever is next to him with just the two guys behind him, like that makes the defense worse. And if you're playing more safeties or not, I'm just frustrated by this whole thing. And, Tyler can get into it more. But for me personally, like I thought that Kyzir White was going to be a must resign, and then the Raiders game happened. Then Kenneth Murray is the best coverage linebacker on the team, and Kenneth Murray is playing on third downs, and Kenneth Murray is doing all this stuff. And so that to me is like the seed of my doubt. And then just talking with Jason on on Twitter, and he was really like the first one that was like, they're gonna let him walk, aren't they? And there were no questions about Kyzir White at the press conferences. None. We got like 13 questions about Tom Telesco's resume and Jerry Tillery and Kenneth Murray and all these guys. And Uchenna Nwosu got his time and Mike Williams got his time. We had 0 questions about Kyzir White. And to me, this just feels exactly like Adrian Phillips. Like you have a guy be stuck on the depth chart and be a solid player, and then as soon as he gets his time to shine, he has a fantastic season. He has a career year. He balls out. And then it's like, well, he's too expensive for us to re-sign. And it's like, are they really though? Like Adrian Phillips walks for pennies. And I think Kyzir White will get more money than Adrian Phillips got in New England. But it just feels like very similar vibes. And again, if White had played the entire game against the Raiders, and if we had gotten some Kyzir White questions at the press conferences, I would probably feel very differently. But right now, it just feels like Adrian Phillips 2.0, and it sucks. I hate it.
Yeah, I hate it too. And going back to the Jerry, why we're connecting these episodes or these two position groups, I think Kenneth Murray was kind of put at a disadvantage, and the coaches did him a disservice last season by moving him around. And part of that was out of necessity. They had to find some sort of role for him. Again, partially that first round bias sort of thing. But now they're going to, it seems like, keep Jerry Tillery there in that starting role. And I think the interior could be better. Like if they draft someone good and they sign someone who's good, I think Kenneth Murray would be in a better position. But right now, if they don't do anything about Tillery, you're going to have some of those issues. That's not going to help Kenneth Murray on the next level. And so I think they're already setting him up for more failure by just being like, I don't know, same group and good luck. So, okay, this Kyzir White one's been fun. And I think the day after the Raiders game, I think we all were like, well, what does that mean for Kyzir White then if Kenneth Murray is out there? And they clearly showed that Kyzir White was the 1B. It's not like Kyzir White was hurt. It's not like he'd been playing poorly. It's not like there's really any reason to not have him out there, except for that Kenneth Murray guy. So I guess first I want to talk about it on a why it makes I want Kyzir White back. The idea of having Murray and Tranquil out there right now does not sound good, and they have not done anything yet to address the interior defensive line. So right now that sounds really scary, but okay. So let's talk about why White wouldn't return, even though I disagree with it. One, it does seem like if the interior defensive line is being reconstructed with the draft, whatever, and if you have to play Mike Williams and Uchenna Nwosu, you have to, like we talked about, you just can't always pay everybody. Like somebody is not going to return. Like even if you liked everybody, you offered everybody, someone is just going to get more money somewhere. I was even talking to Arjun about it, and he agrees, like paying off-ball linebackers typically $8 million or more just isn't really worth it. And as Craig pointed it out, Alex pointed out, in this defense, they're not exactly a priority. So taking that $8 million and giving it to a right tackle or defensive lineman, part of it going to an edge rusher, that is technically more valuable. Another team could obviously throw the bag at him. I want to say it was Popper last year who said that the Chargers were interested in keeping Henry around, but then the Patriots were like, here's $13 million a year. And the Chargers were like, never mind. That's another position where it's not a super valuable position. You want him back, but not at that. Now, White's not getting $13 million a year, I don't think. But Telesco won't exactly just sit there and be like, well, I'll just keep upping the price, and paying with this fun money. Yay. He's going to be sort of rational about it. And then the same thing with Henry. They prepared for his departure in some sort of ways ahead of time. So they sign NFL free agent Steven Anderson. They go find XFL player Donna Parham. They get undrafted free agent Gabe Neighbors, and so that's a free agent, XFL player, an undrafted free agent. And then this past year, if you look at linebacker, right? They have a draft pick. They find an undrafted free agent who played significant snaps. They already had a first-round pick from 2020. They had another fourth-round pick from 2019. So they were definitely preparing for it in the same sort of way they prepared for Henry's departure. And with Henry's departure, they also just brought in Jared Cook, and they drafted Trey McKitty, and that's how they kind of worked with that, position group that isn't super valuable, but you can kind of make it work with a rotation, I guess. But then, yeah, like you said, this is all speculation until we get to the part where Kaiser White went from 100% of the snaps, 100% of the snaps, 100% of the snaps to 71% that last week. And you and I were out, Steven and I were sitting there live going, what is happening? Did someone get hurt? Is there a concussion, equipment malfunction? Is there anything? And it turns out they think he's just the best coverage linebacker as he's slamming, what's his name, down the sideline for a 20-yard defensive pass interference. That's your best coverage linebacker. So all that's why I don't think he would return anyway. And then you have a conversation, which is now why I'm saying just don't even bother thinking about it. The exact words that I got were, hope he returns, but it's a reach. You have a first-round linebacker you paid last year. The only option is to go draft one. So, yes, I don't think he would return at this point anyway, but that is obviously not that great. So when you have that conversation, when you're confident he's gone anyway, that's why I'm very confident that Kaiser White is not returning. The word is reach. It is not, an impossibility that he returns, but the word currently is reach. And based on their needs, based on the way they see him, they value linebackers in this defense, based on having Kenneth Murray and the bias that they've shown to first-round picks. Based on that conversation, I don't think Kaiser White is back next season. If he is, awesome. Again, the word is reach, not impossible, but it doesn't sound like he's returning. And that is really frustrating because you go from Jerry Tillery, first level, to Kenneth Murray, second level, and you're trying to make this run defense work. And I just don't know if it will. This front seven is really concerning to me. They're going all in on their first round picks this year, including Mike Williams, who they're going to pay a lot, and Derwin James, who they're going to extend, which is like fine. Obviously, Derwin James, deserves it. But, they're going all in on the first round picks, and that does include two guys who contribute to the run defense being as bad as it is. And that might be the reason that they don't make the Super Bowl or this game or that, whatever. They're all in on these first round picks, and Kaiser White is going to be gone, and he's going to go somewhere. Maybe the Rams, maybe Green Bay. I know there's cap issues, but smart teams figure it out. He's going to go be an all-pro somewhere, and we're all going to regret it, just like we kind of always do. Yay!
Obviously, I wish that I hope that Kenneth Murray becomes the player that we were all so excited about when they drafted him. There was a great story today about him. I forget the specific details. He did some heroic thing again, as Kenneth Murray tends to do. But I think there is a world in which Kenneth Murray becomes a valuable player going forward. But it's asking a lot. Like, my issues with Kenneth Murray are not the lack of talent or lack of physical ability. It's just him reading things. Like, he does not shed blocks particularly well. And then you add in the fact that he cannot, read ball. He cannot find the ball. Like, it's really that simple. And you look at, there's a clip against the Steelers where the Steelers run a fake jet sweep and then they run to the right and everybody goes to the right. And then Kenneth Murray goes with the jet sweep guy. And you're like, what are you looking at? So if it's a big if Kenneth Murray fixes his eyes, I think he can be a good player. Like if he can figure out how to read offenses, then great. But it's hard for me to look at potentially losing Kaiser White and think that this defense is going to prove it. And Craig points this out. I've given Craig a lot of shout outs tonight. But if you get me an elite defensive line, and if you get me some more safety depth, viable safety depth behind Derwin James, then I can make it work. I can take 15 snaps of Derwin James, put him in the box instead of another linebacker, and I can take some quality safeties. Then I can make it work. But if you're telling me I'm going to get the same damn rotation and lose Kyzir White and put in Kenneth Murray, then it's going to be a problem. So, I just wish I knew, what the plan was, because the whole thing that Staley talked about in the spring was like, oh, I didn't use linebackers last year because I didn't have any. Now I have Kyzir White and Andrew Tranquil and Kenneth Murray, and now you're potentially losing the best linebacker. So it just... I don't know. I'm confused. Are we getting more safeties? Are we getting better defensive line? It's just annoying. It's weird vibes right now on the defense.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to what we were talking about on the defensive line in particular with Jerry Tillery and Justin Jones. It's well, not just the bias for first round picks, but that you're not rewarding production, right?
Right.
Kyzir just had, the season of his career. After a lot of people were asking him to, have that breakout year, and now we're just going to let him walk, right? And I feel like a lot of organizations, yes, every organization takes a lot of stock and investment into their first round picks, but they also kind of know when to cut the cord and who to give preference to when other players are playing well, right? The Patriots don't just sit there and go, oh, well, and Kill Harry is sucking, so we just have to keep playing him all the time.
Yes.
No, they just go, here's Kendrick Bourne, here's Nelson Aguilar, and here's Jacoby Myers or whatever, right? And they just run with it, right? So that's the kind of thing where it's just I think that's all about organizational structure and just getting the next guy up who is going to produce, right? Instead of Kenneth Murray, that should be Kyzir White. Instead of Jerry Tillery, that should be Justin Jones. So I do think there's a lot of stuff like that currently throughout the roster, particularly on the defense that we're talking about. And now it's sort of making a bet also, if Kenneth Murray does improve and he looks more like 2020 Kenneth Murray, then maybe it'll work out.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Then you're probably fine. If Jerry Tillery, ups his production to 6 or 7 sacks, instead of
one more sack, let's go.
Then you can probably get by, but I just don't. I think there's just a very low baseline to the defense right now when you're playing those players. So hope for the best. I hope for improvement, but if you're not banking on the guys who are producing now, then you're just kind of guessing for future production.
Yeah, and it's just tough for me to sit here and look at Kyzir White having the best linebacker season since Donnie Edwards, and it feels like the Chargers will almost set themselves a limit. Okay, Kyzir, we'll pay you this much, and if anybody else offers you more money, then kick rocks, you can go sign with that team. And I mean, lesser extent, right? But that kind of feels like what happened with Rayshawn Jenkins. It kind of felt like they wanted him back if he was the right price. And then the Jaguars were like, here's $27 million, Rayshawn Jenkins, come on down. So,
tax free.
Yeah. So honestly, if Kyzir wants to be back enough and he takes a discount, then, good for him. That can certainly still happen. But again, it just kind of feels like they're going to set that bar and be like, okay, go find somewhere else. And I feel like something similar could happen to Justin Jones. Okay, here's the max we'll pay you. If you want to go find more, go for it. And particularly Justin Jones, if he wanted to get back to a 4-3 scheme, I would not be surprised by that. That being said, before we get into how we want to improve, One thing I will say in terms of another positive, and maybe we should have led with this one. It seems like Nick Neiman is like kind of becoming a special teams ace. Like, I mean, he
All
was on
right.
the rookie team for special teams, and I mean, he led the team in special teams tackles, and obviously Tyler feels great about that because we had him on our mock drafts. But I feel like Nick Neiman, there's something there in terms of like a depth piece, special teams impact player. Maybe kind of like best case Nick DeZubnar sort of thing.
Wow,
Um,
what a
but
ceiling.
I'm saying in terms of like special teams, but I do think
Okay.
that Nick Neiman could be like a valuable third linebacker down the road if given the chance. So wanted to give a shout out to Neiman because I do think he had a good rookie season, at least in terms of special teams, and I think we saw some of the flashes, against the Ravens and against the Texans and in the preseason. So I do think there's something there with Nick Neiman.
Depends on what they who they decide to replace
Right.
Darius Swinton with, I guess.
Whatever that is. Yeah, Nick Neiman listen, they drafted, everyone's like, oh, you can't draft guys just to play special teams. But that's kind of all he did. And hey, he was fourth most special teams tackles in the NFL. I'll take it. The Chargers always seem to have someone up there in the top 5. They just keep replacing them every year. But at least you have a guy you have for a few more years now, so that's good. My only concern, and the whole concern of the linebacker group, is just how they evaluate these guys. I don't know what he's looking like in practice,
Right.
but to me, Neiman is the guy you drafted who has a much higher ceiling as an athlete and in coverage than Ogbongbemiga. Yet Ogbongbemiga got that start, and he got juked out by Rex Burkhead. So, going with someone like Neiman, I thought would have been the better choice, especially after in the preseason, he was arguably the best player for them in the preseason. Not that there weren't mistakes, but he's a guy like that's kind of the guy you should roll with. But they went with Ogbongbemiga instead. So I assume they'll do the same thing this year. And, I'd like for him to get more snaps, but it doesn't sound like he will. So it'll be Tranquil and Kenneth Murray. And then the backup's going to be Amen Ogbongbemiga instead of the guy that they drafted. And, we'll see how that goes.
Great vibes with the linebackers on today's show. That being said, we didn't really talk about this with the defensive line, but I want to get your guys' thoughts here on how you would go about improving the defensive line, and then of course the linebackers. I did a little bit of this on my own with the composite defensive tackle rankings, which I did last week. But let's kind of walk this out a little bit in terms of the scenarios here. So Alex, we'll start with you. How would you go about improving the defensive line? You can mention specific names if you want to, or just more general strategies. But how are you hoping the team goes about solving this defensive line going forward?
I mean, I think the first thing is replacing Linval Joseph. You do have to replace Linval Joseph with a nose tackle who is preferably younger. Everyone's talked about kind of all the guys that we've mentioned potentially in the draft. If you want to go the route of a Jordan Davis, if you want to go the route of a Sebastian Joseph Day, whatever that route sort of ends up being, I do think that's the first kind of priority you have to do is figure out who's going to be that nose tackle in this 3-4 defense. Then I think outside of that, figuring out what role Jerry Tillery is going to play. If he's going to be a starter that's going to play 70-80% of the snaps, or is he going to be a rotational pass rusher? Because I think that really determines what the ceiling for this defensive line is. And then I think you're talking about kind of getting someone who's more of a pass rusher and a run stuffer type. If they wanted to go after Akeem Hicks, or also, maybe someone who can get that production elsewhere in free agency, I think that would be interesting. But there's a lot of interesting defensive tackles. People have mentioned DJ Jones, who's balling out himself, just had a good game against the Rams. So we'll see what happens going forward. But for me, it's just about getting more talent, sort of replacing the guys that they currently have right now that led to a 28th ranked run defense. And I do think there's a conversation to potentially be had about Uchenna Nwosu. I don't know if they're going to re-sign him, and we haven't talked a lot about edge, but it is an interesting edge free agent class. Someone like Von Miller is going to be a free agent. You do have Jadeveon Clowney if you wanted to boost the run defense on the edge. If they were to move on from someone like Uchenna Nwosu. So I don't really know what they're going to do, but if they did kind of want to fortify that, that's something that kind of gives you a little bit more margin for error in the interior of your defensive line, just having that pass rush, run defense presence on the edge. So I don't know what they're going to end up doing with Uchenna Nwosu. I would expect him to be back, but I don't know. So I think figuring out the edge spot opposite Joey Bosa is going to be particularly important as well, especially in the event that they decide to move on.
Yeah, before Tyler jumps in and gives his thoughts, I would be pretty surprised if Uchenna and Nwosu were on a different team next year, just based off of what Brandon Staley said after the season, throughout the season, and then Tom Telesco, saying in his press conference, of course, that can change depending on what kind of market Nwosu has. I can't imagine he's going to get a ton just because Alex mentioned the free agency class. You have Harold Landry, you have Hassan Reddick, who I wanted to sign last year. But you have a bunch of these other players who I think are at least like a smidge above Nwosu, if not, a whole tier. But in terms of the edge, and again, we didn't really talk about it a ton, but I think they bring back Nwosu, but then I need a legitimate like 2A, 2B situation there, because Nwosu isn't, that great of a player. Like, he is very solid, but I need two legitimately solid players alongside Joey Bosa as opposed to what we got this year with Kyler Fackrell.
No, I completely agree. And it does tie into your defensive line, this edge rusher, whether it's the draft class or whatever. I have not really gotten to the edge rusher group. I have not gotten into the interior defensive line group outside of Jordan Davis and holy crap, I'm forgetting his name, DeMarvin Leal. Those guys, I'll have to see how I feel about them once I'm done with more film study. I'll just take the Jordan Davis scenario though, just to see what can we do with that. I see, Steven, that you have two guys that are highlighted on your chart, so I'm not going to talk about those guys. You have two very good names there, so I'll let you talk about those guys. Me, first I would like them to find some sort of defensive tackle in free agency. Obviously, the idea that they would go into the draft needing a starting defensive tackle and a starting nose tackle sounds awful. So at least I hope one of those is solved. But I think getting the high end defensive tackle, whatever they need, is probably the priority there. And then you can find your run stuffing nose tackle in the draft, or maybe in free agency, depending on who's available after the draft, or maybe cut candidate or whatever. So let's say you sign your defensive tackle, someone you're about to mention, I'm sure, and then you draft Jordan Davis in the first round, which I'm moderately okay with. I think I know he's a 1-2 down sort of guy, but like Chris Harrison pointed out, people are overthinking it. Let him just go dominate for 2 downs. Because Jerry Tillery only is okay on 1 down. So if we can get a guy who can do for 2 downs, that's an improvement. That's twice the output. So I'm okay with that. And then to me, like you said, go get an edge rusher 3, because I think at that point, like a legitimate edge rusher 3. I think the Chargers, they were at their best as a pass rushing group when they had Ingram and Bosa, but then they also had Uchenna and Nwosu. Let Ingram roam around, stand up, rush to the A gap or whatever it was. Just something crazy. In this particular case, the way they seem to be playing it is move Bosa inside, have the edge rusher. It was Fackrell, rush from the outside. And so I think if you find your defensive tackle, you have Jerry Tillery, you get your nose tackle like Jordan Davis. If on 3rd down or obvious passing situations, you want to get your legitimate edge 3, put him on the outside, move Bosa on the inside. I think you can find a way to make that work. So that's my scenario that I'd go with if I were going to go with Jordan Davis in the first round.
Yeah, Jordan Davis is impressive. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, that dude is crazy and he's huge. Yeah. I just look at historically with nose tackles, you don't invest a first round pick in a nose tackle. And of course, some people will point to Vita Vea, but Vita Vea had legitimate pass rush chops in college, and he had 45 pressures this year in the NFL. So Jordan Davis is not giving you that. And I think Davis has value. I think he can absolutely bring a dominant kind of nose tackle that the Chargers have never had, frankly, since Jamal Williams. And I think, there could be certain value there. But I think with Jordan Davis in particular, the thing is, everybody kind of points to the lack of a high snap count as well, he can become a better pass rusher with a higher snap count. And I'm like, to me, if you're drafting Jordan Davis, you want that snap count around 30, 40 tops a game, so he can really do his one thing at the highest level. And I just don't know if that one thing is worth a first round pick. And I look at kind of what the Rams have done. Of course, it's the easy comparison, but I mean, Greg Gaines was a 7th-round pick. Sebastian Joseph Day, a 6th-round pick. Like, you don't need to invest a high-end draft pick or premium free agency capital in the nose tackle position to get like a truly high-end nose tackle. So that really is my thing. If it comes in free agency, if they do sign Sebastian Joseph Day, I think his Pro Football Focus projection is a little rich, and I think his over the cap projection is a little low. PFF has him at 3 years for 10 million per, and over the cap has him at like 1 for 2.5. So I think that probably is somewhere in the middle there. If they want to sign in, that's great. I know a lot of people are a little worried about the injury. So in terms of the nose tackle, I'm not investing a ton of capital there. I think you could sign an Austin Johnson, who I think, I wanted them to trade for. And I think that him and Brain Fajoko, I think that gives you enough at nose tackle. So really where I would prefer to see them focus the resources are at the 3 tech and at the 4-eye. And if that requires moving on from Justin Jones, then fine. But they need to get better than Christian Covington. They need to get better than Jerry Tillery, and they need to get better than Justin Jones, frankly. So everybody really is focusing in on the nose tackle, and I get that. But nose tackle wasn't the problem this year because Linval Joseph and Brain Fajoko were 2 of the most productive defensive tackles in the league. The problem is the players next to them. So that's kind of where I'm focusing on. I think, in terms of draft prospects, I have a pretty high grade on Travis Jones from Connecticut and Neil Farrell from LSU. And I think you can get those players in the 3rd, 4th round, 5th round, and I think you can be fine. So I would prefer to sign a high-end free agent at the 3 tech 4-eye and then also draft somebody there, whether that's Devontae Wyatt or I forget his name from Alabama. I think he goes by Philarius. I forget his name.
Fedarian Mathis.
That's the one. So I think that's the move. If you're going to invest heavily in the defensive line, is not the nose. It's the other 2 positions.
Yeah, I need to dive into this class more because everyone's like, well, take Davis at 17. It's like, okay, well, you could.
Yeah.
But I have no idea who's after. Like, I just don't know who's after him. So if there's a Tyler Shelvin in the 3rd round, I'll freaking do that again. I will mock draft that over and over and over and over again until somebody else ends up taking him and breaking my heart.
Man, yeah, we love Tyler Shelvin.
I think the most interesting thing, I mean, we talked a little bit about edge, but I think it's going to be what Uchenna Nwosu costs relative to what the rest of the market costs, because obviously there's a lot of edge projections. We sort of projected Uchenna Nwosu would be around 12 mil a year, or somewhere around that. Let's say someone like Von Miller were to become available, right? And then, would you rather have him on a short-term deal or Uchenna Nwosu potentially on a 3 or 4 year deal, right? For around the same amount of money. Or, obviously there's Chandler Jones won't be that inexpensive, but there are stopgap options you can kind of get in that regard as opposed to re-signing Uchenna for that much money. So I'll be curious to see how much Tom Telesco values the edge position and also if he's kind of willing to go all in, speaking kind of as a parody of the show at this point. But I don't know. I think that's the one thing that people aren't talking about as much, but we'll see because obviously everyone's talking about defensive tackles and how he can improve them.
Yeah, I mean, if they want to invest in a high-end edge rusher, this offseason, whether that's Von Miller or Jadeveon Clowney and Uchenna Nwosu, I think they have the money to do that, especially if they're going to sign one of those players on a short 1-year deal. So I know the emphasis right now is all in Jordan Davis and solving the nose tackle position. I think it's the other problems there. So, I haven't studied a ton of like 3 tech, 4 techs. I know Tyler really likes DeMarvin Leal. I really like Devontae Wyatt. I think you could also sign, Larry Ogunjobi, depending on how his health is. Maybe Folurunzo Fatukasi becomes available. So
you guys are just making these names up at this point.
I wish I had to practice that one, man. I had to look up how that guy's name was pronounced. So,
wow, this is going to be a crazy draft season.
I know. BJ Hill would be fantastic, but after today, I'd be surprised if Cincinnati let him walk after he essentially won that game today. But yeah, in terms of the linebackers, really quickly, if they do lose Kyzir White, and they want to add a veteran there, I think a sneaky pickup there would be Alex Anzalone from the Detroit Lions. Of course, was with the New Orleans Saints for a few years with Michael Wilhoit as his position coach. And Anzalone actually graded out really well in my composite rankings. Fantastic against the pass, more so than against the run. So I could, see something there. And then Quan Alexander is the other one there that's connected to Michael Wilhoit from his days with the Saints also. So everybody's going to ask me about Devin Lloyd. I'm sorry, Alex. People are asking me. So I'm not investing a first round pick in a linebacker as much as I like Devin Lloyd or Nakobe Dean. I think this team has too many other needs at premium positions. But of course, if the team drafts the best Utah player in its program history, I will be very happy.
Oh, I'll talk about Devin Lloyd. You mean future Eagle Devin Lloyd?
Oh, you can't. No, that's a waste. You cannot put him in that conservative ass coverage scheme and expect to get the most out of him. No, absolutely not.
Rebuttal. All right. Yeah, people are talking about DeMarvin. It's Leal?
I think it's Leal, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. People are talking about DeMarvin Leal in the comments. I'm not sure how I feel about him. You can see the hand usage is great. You can see that there's a pass rush. Like I messaged Steven. The first play I saw of him was against Kent State, and it was an edge rusher. I'm like, wait, who am I watching? Who is this defensive tackle? Like, what is he stand up edge rusher? Like it's a 3-4 defense or something. I mean, what are we doing here? But he does that. I mean, he moves all over the place. So he's very interesting. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, unfortunately, I watched Jordan Davis and then I watched Leal, who's much better pass rusher. But it's like, oh, that's okay against the run. That's a big, big, big difference.
Yeah.
So, is he bad against it? No. Does he flash? Absolutely. He's got good pass rush moves. He's quick. But I don't know how I feel about him just yet. And I don't know if I like him at 17 all that much, but the projections are good.
Yeah, that was me watching Andrew Booth and Kaiir Elam and then watching Roger McCreary just stink it up and be a passive ass tackler.
Yeah, I remember reading one of your guys' tweets. I don't remember whose composite rankings it was, but you could also take a chance on a linebacker who I think can grade well into a contract potentially in the future, right? Like I think Alec Ogletree would probably be like a pretty decent addition. Talk about the Rams and Brandon Staley connections and how that works. Micah Kyzir, free agent. So that would kind of be an interesting way if they decide to go that way. I'm interested to see if they add a linebacker or if they're just comfortable either re-signing White or not re-signing White and then just rolling with that they have now. Because I certainly wouldn't mind more depth there, especially if it's cheap depth that can eventually kind of ascend.
Yeah, it's really going to be interesting to see how Staley kind of remakes this in terms of like just number of players at each position, because when at the Rams, like they only had 4 linebackers from start to finish last year. Of course, this year they had 5. You had 5 defensive linemen at one point in the year, and then 6 and 4 edge rushers versus 5 with the Rams last year. So, roster construction, I think, is going to be an interesting thing to watch there. There was something I was going to say, and then I forgot it. Shoot. Someone asked a question and I was going to respond to. Oh, the Grady Jarrett thing is interesting because the Falcons have a shit show of cap space at this point. They have like a $48 million cap hit on Matt Ryan this year. But there is a world in which the Falcons are kind of the best team in the conference or the division now because Tom Brady is retiring and the Buccaneers have a ton of free agents. So the Falcons can save, I think it's $11 million by cutting Grady Jarrett. If that does happen, he would be probably my number 1 free agent target, just because I think that's a perfect fit for him. He was in a 3-4 scheme in college, I believe, and I think he still has a ton of disruptive ball. Of course, it's a position of need. So that's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on. I talked to a couple of Falcons podcasters reaching out to them a couple of weeks ago, and they seem to think that the Falcons would do it because they have so many other needs besides defensive tackle, and Jarrett doesn't really fit the timeline. So, and they have the Calvin Ridley mess potentially. So Grady Jarrett is somebody that I'm definitely keeping my eye on. And if he does get cut, then 100% sign me up. That's free agent target number 1 for me if that happens.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, again, finding some sort of 3 tech the Jones replacement in free agency, I think is the way to go. I'm totally okay with that. And then I'm still leaning corner at 17, but I haven't gotten to that class. I'm curious how much the quantity of draft picks that they have is going to affect how they build this roster, because like, is there someone we're not talking about at another, maybe not even a different position, that's just not going to make the team when we think they would, because they have 4 7th round picks? I mean, someone's going to be on, like, they have to fit potentially 11 new people on the team. Are 11 people, enough people departing that we expect to depart this season? I don't know. Do they move? I don't know. I don't know. How often do teams have double-digit picks and then retain all of those picks?
I mean, I don't think they're going to make all those selections with the spots they have on the roster. I mean, considering what they'll do in free agency, and also they can trade up in the draft, right? So, I mean, you can probably, turn a 5th round pick into a 4th or something if you package together a couple 7ths, right? Or you could use that for special teams depth and then trade up earlier if you wanted. But yeah, I don't think there's any way they're signing 11 players in terms of like a draft class. I'd be pretty surprised. And knowing Tom Telesco, it'll be 4 running backs with those 7th round picks anyway. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, everything I'm hearing right now in terms of like positions of depth, it sounds like this tight end class is fantastic. I mean, both people from the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl have each said that that's their best and deepest position at the All-Star games. There were even a couple at the NFLPA Bowl. And, it sounds like at the Shrine Bowl so far, that has come to fruition. Like, the tight ends are really shining and taking the attention. So maybe we don't see a Steven Anderson come back. Maybe we don't see I'd be pretty surprised if Parham did not come back because he's a restricted free agent. But maybe tight end becomes like a sneaky need that they feel like they can upgrade through the draft, as opposed to bringing back Cook and bringing back Anderson and all that stuff. But I don't know. I haven't really dove into much of it. I know that the UCLA tight end is fantastic, but that's really all the extent of my knowledge of the tight end class is right now.
I'm generally mostly irritated that I have to actually watch running backs, tight ends, and linebackers this draft class.
Yeah. And I haven't focused it much on Trayvon Walker either, but that guy is absolutely a 1st round pick. And that dude is a monster along with everybody else along that defensive line. All right, guys. Any final thoughts on the defensive line or linebackers? And then we'll head out for the day. No. All right. So that's going to do it for us today. We're going to have some fun conversations this week. Of course, talking with some draft analysts from here on out, getting some of their thoughts on the Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl. Hopefully that is coming in the next few days, but we'll see. As always, if you are listening to this on a podcast platform of your choice, please leave us a rating or review. If you are watching this now, please like the video, comment, subscribe to the channel. We do really always appreciate that. So that's going to do it for us tonight, guys. We'll see you next time.